Sahilma, Raza, and Nimra Javed stepped into the quiet Dubai penthouse believing they were starting a high-paid assignment, never knowing Sheikh Hamal Al-Zariq had already marked them for elimination the moment their names appeared on his screen. Sheikh Hamal Al-Zariq had always been a man wrapped in layers of mystery, the kind that both fascinated and unsettled the people around him. In Dubai's towering skyline of glass and wealth, he was one of the few figures who rarely appeared at social gatherings, yet remained deeply influential. His fortune stretched across real estate, offshore mining ventures, and private tech firms that few outsiders had ever heard of. Even among investors, he was considered unpredictable, a man who could disappear from the public eye for months and then return with a new project that reshaped entire districts. Despite his visible success, those who worked close to him often noticed a darkness in his personality. He was methodical in a way that felt unnatural, almost mechanical, as if emotions were an inconvenience he refused to entertain. Everything he owned, from his cars to his clothing to his penthouse, followed strict rules of placement and design. Nothing was out of order, nothing left to chance. The penthouse itself was more like a fortified outpost than a home. Floors reinforced with hidden steel layers, doors weighing hundreds of kilograms, and surveillance systems that recorded every inch of the space 24 hours a day. He kept no staff inside. Cleaning teams entered only when he was away, supervised by multiple cameras. The reason behind this extreme secrecy went back years. Early in his career, Hamal had been involved in a large acquisition deal that unexpectedly collapsed, causing tensions between several influential business circles. Officially, it was described as a misunderstanding, a failed negotiation. Unofficially, rumors whispered about evidence that could expose illegal transactions. Nothing was ever proven, but the whispers clung to him like a shadow that refused to fade. Though he was never publicly accused, he knew that too many people were aware of pieces of the truth. Over time, this awareness grew into paranoia. Hamal began monitoring not just his associates, but also distant acquaintances. He collected information obsessively: financial records, travel logs, private communications, anything he could use to ensure that no one would ever gain leverage over him again. His trusted circle shrank until only 3 people remained close enough to know even fragments of his personal life. Anyone else was kept at a distance. One evening, while reviewing encrypted messages hidden in a server only he could access, he found a new alert. Someone had bypassed one of his minor security shields and left a single anonymous message. It was short and direct, stating that the sender possessed documents exposing his involvement in the long-buried scandal. The message ended with the claim that 2 individuals would soon contact him, carrying proof he would never escape. The unknown sender hadn't asked for money, hadn't made threats, hadn't named the individuals. That alone unsettled Hamal the most of all. A blackmailer usually wanted something, but this felt different. It felt like a warning from someone who did not care about consequences or negotiations. To Hamal, this was the most dangerous kind of enemy, one who acted without predictable patterns. He spent the next 2 nights reviewing every angle. He cross-checked all recent arrivals to the city, scanned background histories of anyone who might be approaching his circle, and monitored airport entries. Nothing stood out, yet the message had come through a channel too sophisticated for an amateur. Someone with high technical skill had sent it, someone confident enough to slip into his systems but cautious enough to leave no trace. That combination ignited the worst of Hamal's fears. He convinced himself that whoever the 2 individuals were, they represented a direct threat to everything he had built and everything he had concealed. His mind no longer searched for logic, it focused on elimination. In his worldview, danger had to be erased before it had the chance to grow. And so, in a moment of private, chilling resolute, he decided that whoever arrived at his penthouse, whether carrying evidence or not, would never be allowed to leave.
Sahilma Raza had built her career through a mix of bold decisions and relentless curiosity. Growing up in Karachi, she had learned early that the world rewarded those who refused to look away from uncomfortable truths. She began as a freelance digital researcher, verifying online identities for small firms, but her skills quickly outgrew the modest jobs she received. Soon, she was tracking fraudulent networks, mapping suspicious financial trails, and helping victims recover stolen assets. Her reputation grew quietly, shared among clients who valued discretion. By the time she reached her late 20s, she was recognized as someone capable of unraveling even the most complicated digital schemes. Nimra Javed, her closest partner in work, was known for her calm and analytical nature. Where Sahilma chased leads with instinct, Nimra worked through them patiently, examining details others often ignored. Their partnership formed unexpectedly at a cybersecurity workshop. But once they solved a case together, they realized they balanced each other perfectly. Over the years, they took on assignments others rejected, jobs involving identity laundering, offshore scams, and hidden communication channels. They were not detectives in the traditional sense, but their success rate surpassed many professionals in the field. Both women lived simple lives, often traveling for short-term assignments, sometimes receiving payment in cryptocurrency, sometimes in cash. They operated independently and avoided long-term commitments with agencies. Their clients were usually small businesses or private individuals looking for answers. It was unusual for them to receive a request from a foreign source, especially one offering an amount that seemed too generous for what was described as verification work. The initial email appeared from an encrypted address. It contained few details, only stating that their expertise was required urgently to examine a digital set of documents for authenticity. The sender claimed that the files could not be transferred electronically and must be reviewed in person. The meeting location was Dubai, with full travel arrangements taken care of. The payment promised was enough to cover several months of their usual workload. Sahilma hesitated. Something felt off. High-paying jobs rarely came without complications, but the sender had included references to some of their previous work, details that only a serious client could know. Nimra was more cautious, but agreed that the opportunity was unusual enough to consider. After days of discussion, they replied, asking for clarification. The response came immediately, still vague yet confident, urging them to travel as soon as possible. The message emphasized secrecy, claiming the documents were sensitive and the client could not risk exposure. The lack of transparency troubled them, but curiosity outweighed concern. They had solved countless cases that began with similarly cryptic messages. They convinced themselves it was simply another high-risk, high-reward assignment. They submitted their passport details and received flight tickets within hours. Everything was arranged with a level of efficiency that suggested deep resources behind the request. On the day of departure, both women felt a strange mixture of excitement and unease. Sahilma reviewed their communication multiple times during the flight, trying to extract hidden meaning from the short responses they had received. Nimra spent most of the journey checking public databases to see if the client's encrypted address had been used in any past transactions. Nothing surfaced. It was as if the sender existed only in the few messages exchanged with them. When they landed in Dubai, they expected a representative to greet them with a sign or an instruction. Instead, a silent chauffeur approached, identifying them only by their first names. He wore no uniform and carried no visible identification. Without saying a word, he gestured toward a black vehicle waiting at the curb. The silence unsettled both women, but they boarded the car anyway, assuming this was part of the client's demand for privacy. The drive through the city felt long despite the smooth traffic. The vehicle's windows were tinted, and the chauffeur kept his eyes fixed on the road. He avoided conversation entirely, responding to neither questions nor casual attempts at interaction. Once they entered a quieter district filled with luxury high-rises, Sahilma and Nimra exchanged uneasy glances. They knew they were being taken somewhere exclusive, but the lack of information made the experience feel increasingly unnatural. The car stopped at a towering building with a private entrance. The driver stepped out, opened the door for them, and motioned for them to proceed toward a waiting elevator. As soon as they stepped inside, the doors closed automatically. There were no buttons to select a floor, just a smooth canal and a faint hum as the elevator began to rise. Unknown to them, they were no longer guests on an assignment. They were entering a carefully designed trap, from which no one had ever been meant to return. The elevator rose so smoothly that Sahilma and Nimra barely felt the movement. There were no buttons, no emergency panel, and no visible seams in the walls, as if the entire structure had been molded as a single piece. A soft white light illuminated the space, too bright to be comforting, yet too clean to suggest danger. The air felt colder the higher they went, and a faint vibration echoed beneath the floor, like the distant hum of machinery working far below. The silence inside the elevator was absolute, making their breathing sound unnaturally loud. By the time the doors opened, both women were alert, sensing that their arrival was not being guided by chance. The doors revealed a long corridor leading directly into a spacious penthouse. The flooring was polished stone, reflecting the ceiling lights in sharp, symmetrical patterns that made the hallway feel endless. No staff greeted them, no host stepped forward, and no instructions appeared on any screen. The space felt abandoned yet perfectly maintained, as if someone had prepared the environment but had no intention of showing themselves. At the far end of the corridor, the penthouse opened into a massive living area filled with minimalist furniture arranged with almost clinical precision. Every surface was spotless, every object perfectly aligned. The silence was unsettling. Sahilma noticed that even the usual sounds of a functioning apartment, air conditioning vents, distant traffic, faint hums of electronics, were absent. Instead, she heard a low, repetitive clicking sound that seemed to come from behind the walls. Nimra scanned the room subtly, recognizing the pattern of hidden cameras. They were everywhere, built seamlessly into corners, shelves, and even decorative items. Whoever owned this place monitored everything. That, more than anything, made her uneasy. The walls were lined with oversized screens displaying live surveillance feeds from numerous angles, hallways, elevators, entrances, and even outside the building. At a first glance, the images appeared to show ordinary activity, but a closer look revealed that some feeds had no movement at all, as if they were on a loop or intentionally capturing empty spaces. It felt as though the building had been cleared for a specific purpose. Sahilma and Nimra exchanged cautious looks. They had never encountered a client who communicated exclusively through silence. Still, they walked deeper into the penthouse, assuming someone would eventually appear or a message would appear on one of the screens. But nothing changed. The environment remained motionless, and the stillness grew more oppressive. A sharp mechanical sound echoed suddenly across the room. The entrance door sealed shut, locking instantly. The women turned instinctively, but the doors had fused with the wall, leaving no visible handle or seam. The soft lighting dimmed slightly, replaced with a colder bluish hue that made the space feel less like a home and more like an examination chamber. One of the security screens flickered, briefly showing static before switching to another set of feeds. Nimra approached one of the screens to examine it more closely. As she leaned in, the screens all shifted at once, displaying their own live images from different angles within the penthouse. The surveillance system had locked onto them, tracking every small movement. It was clear now that nothing inside the room was harmless. Everything was part of a system designed to monitor, record, and react. Behind one of the walls, the soft clicking sound grew louder. It repeated in rhythmic bursts, mechanical and steady, like gears preparing to move. Sahilma instinctively backed away from the sound, her instincts screaming that something was wrong. She had worked in high-risk environments before, but never had a client's home felt like a weapon. Without warning, the floor beneath them shifted almost imperceptibly. A thin line of light appeared along the seams of several tiles, revealing hidden compartments beneath the surface. A faint mist rose from the cracks, barely visible, but strong enough to carry a metallic scent. Nimra recognized the smell instantly. Not poison, but a sterilizing chemical used in controlled environments. It was a sign that the space was preparing for some kind of automated process. Realization struck them both, simultaneously. The penthouse wasn't just monitored, it was engineered with traps built into its design. They were not being welcomed, they were being processed. The screens flickered once more, and this time a single message appeared in plain, cold text. Entry confirmed. Evidence neutralization in progress. The message disappeared instantly, replaced once again by their own images, now marked with red tracking frames. Sahilma and Nimra understood, far too late, that the moment they walked through the elevator doors, their fate had already been decided.
Inspector Kareem Al-Saifan had built his career on noticing what others overlooked. In a city where wealth could silence almost anything, Kareem had made a name for himself by following quiet clues, patterns hidden in digital logs, inconsistencies buried in official paperwork, and subtle behaviors captured by surveillance systems most people never thought to check. His colleagues often said he had the patience of a machine, yet the instincts of someone who understood human nature far better than most. It was this combination that brought him to the case of the two missing Pakistani women. The initial report came through routine channels. 2 foreign visitors had entered Dubai, but had not checked into any hotel, contacted any relative, or exited through any known route. Their travel visas had been logged at the airport, and their mobile numbers went silent minutes after landing. At first, the missing persons file was treated as a simple case of travelers going off the grid, something that happened occasionally. But when Kareem examined the file during his regular review of unusual entries, he noticed a series of small details that suggested something far more serious. The women, Sahilma Raza and Nimra Javed, had no criminal background, no suspicious affiliations, and no signs of reckless behavior in their travel history. Their financial records showed modest but stable activity. Their flight tickets had been purchased by an unknown entity using a digital banking route often associated with high-end private clients. The moment he saw the combination, foreign freelancers, encrypted booking channels, silence after landing, he felt something was deeply wrong. Kareem began by checking the transportation network logs. Every registered taxi, rideshare, and private driver passing through the airport left a digital trace. It was a tedious process, but he eventually located a vehicle that had received anonymous authorization to pick up 2 passengers matching the women's descriptions. The vehicle had no company branding and had been cleared through a temporary approval code that expired minutes after being used. This type of code was available only to a select group of wealthy residents. He traced the vehicle's route through external street cameras. The digital trail ended at one of the city's most exclusive residential towers, a building known to house only a handful of elite occupants. Most floors belonged to private owners who valued anonymity. When he checked guest entry logs, he discovered something disturbing. The women's passports were scanned at the entrance, but no record showed them leaving. Every exit door, every emergency stairwell, every basement route all showed no sign of their departure. Kareem attempted to access the building's internal surveillance system, expecting resistance. But what he found was far worse. Entire sections of footage were missing, not corrupted, not deleted. The files were replaced with empty segments that had been overwritten with empty data blocks. Someone intentionally replaced the footage and ensured no trace of the original remained. The precision of the wipe suggested high-level expertise, more advanced than typical tampering seen in criminal cases. Whoever erased the footage knew exactly what they were doing and had access to the most secure areas of the building. The absence of evidence became evidence itself. Kareem knew the building catered to individuals who could afford privacy far beyond normal means. But he also knew that erasing internal surveillance required cooperation or involvement from someone with enormous authority. There was only one resident in that tower with enough control to alter the system at this scale: Sheikh Hamal Al-Zariq. Kareem had heard of Hamal before, not through official channels, but through quiet conversations in high-level investigative circles. Stories of his extreme secrecy, his private surveillance networks, and his isolation were well known among those who had reason to monitor the movements of powerful figures. Nothing about Hamal was illegal, but everything about him suggested a man with something to protect at all costs. Still, even the wealthiest residents could not legally hide a disappearance. Kareem requested access to the building's off-site data backups, assuming they might reveal more. But when the files arrived, he noticed something unexpected. The tampering was sloppy. Certain metadata entries had not been fully wiped. Timestamps did not align. Hidden fragments of internal logs showed unauthorized access from a device that did not belong to Hamal's usual operating patterns. Someone inside Hamal's trusted circle had interfered, leaving traces not by accident, but by intention. This discovery shifted the case entirely. The missing women were not victims of a spontaneous event. They were caught in the middle of a conflict happening behind the scenes, one involving someone close to Hamal who wanted the truth exposed. The sloppy edits were not mistakes, they were breadcrumbs. Kareem leaned back in his chair, studying the fractured logs, and felt a rare chill wash over him. Whoever planted those small remnants wanted him to find them. Someone inside the penthouse wanted this case to be uncovered.
The more Kareem studied the corrupted data, the more he realized that the missing women had been drawn into a much larger internal struggle, one that had been unfolding beneath the surface for months, invisible to the outside world. The small inconsistencies in the logs, the mismatched timestamps, and the hidden fragments of system commands all pointed towards someone deliberately sabotaging the cover-up. It was not the work of a panicked amateur. It was the work of someone who knew the Penthouse systems intimately and wanted their interference to be noticed by the right person. Kareem began digging deeper into records connected to Hamal's private network, tracing every device that had accessed the building's restricted digital channels in the past year. Only one new device appeared during the time frame leading up to the women's disappearance: an encrypted terminal registered under the name Marzun Haleer. The identity belonged to a former security consultant who had worked for several high-net-worth clients in multiple countries. His employment history showed periods of freelance surveillance work, counterintelligence roles, and short-term consulting for wealthy individuals seeking to fortify their private spaces. It was a background suited for someone tasked with enhancing or managing Hamal's complex security ecosystem. Yet Marzun had vanished from public activity 3 months prior, the same time Hamal's systems began showing unusual behavior patterns. When Kareem reviewed financial transfers involving Hamal's offshore accounts, he noticed a repeated funneling of funds into a private account linked to Marzun. Small amounts that were unlikely to raise suspicion individually, but consistent enough to indicate ongoing involvement. These payments were not listed in any official employment documentation. They existed only in fragmented financial trails that required deliberate reconstruction. It became clear that Marzun was working off the books, possibly manipulating internal systems from within the penthouse itself. The most unsettling discovery, however, came from an isolated metadata fragment embedded deep within the overwritten surveillance files. It contained a single encrypted note left behind by the saboteur. After decoding it, Kareem found a message, that simply read, "He will destroy anyone he fears. You must see what he's done." The message was unsigned, but its presence, hidden where only a determined investigator would find it, confirmed that Marzun had intentionally exposed pieces of the truth. He was not trying to defend Hamal. He was trying to force someone to uncover what Hamal was doing. Through further analysis, Kareem pieced together the broader narrative. For months, Marzun had been secretly gathering evidence of Hamal's illegal activities: financial manipulation, forced data breaches, and the creation of elaborate surveillance traps for people he believed threatened him. The anonymous message that had lured Sahilma and Nimra to Dubai originated from a device linked to Marzun, but his intention had not been to involve them in harm. The message referenced 2 individuals, yet it never mentioned the women by name. It became clear the message was intended for entirely different targets, individuals connected to the scandal Marzun had been trying to expose. Somehow, Sahilma and Nimra's identities were mistakenly matched to the message, perhaps through a data misalignment or intercepted correspondence. Hamal, blinded by paranoia, saw them as enemies and activated the Penthouse's lethal systems without hesitation. What had been meant as a controlled confrontation turned into a senseless execution triggered by a mistaken assumption. Using all the evidence gathered, Kareem prepared to confront Hamal. But when a warrant was finally issued and the Penthouse breached, Hamal was gone. The space was immaculate, emptied of personal belongings, digital records, and even the hidden systems that once powered the internal traps. Only one new elevator keycard remained on a marble table, placed there deliberately, almost tauntingly. Days later, Marzun surrendered to authorities at a remote checkpoint near the border. He admitted to leaking information and attempting to expose Hamal's crimes, but he insisted the deaths of Sahilma and Nimra were not part of his plan. His voice carried a strange mixture of remorse and fear, as though he knew that revealing the truth had put him in far greater danger than remaining silent. The case became one of the most disturbing, unresolved events in Dubai's hidden crime history. The disappearance of Hamal, the calculated sabotage from within his own inner circle, and the tragic involvement of 2 innocent women formed a narrative that raised more questions than answers. For Kareem, it was a haunting reminder that in the shadows of power, even a small misunderstanding could end lives and erase futures. And somewhere beyond the city's glittering skyline, the man responsible for it all walked free, wrapped in the same secrecy that had defined his life from the beginning.
Kareem knew that the official case file on the disappearance of a sheikh would eventually be sealed, buried under classified restrictions and political pressure. But he refused to let it end there. Every unresolved detail bothered him. The penthouse, the tampered footage, the subtle digital fingerprints left behind by Marzun, and most of all, the absence of any solid trace of Hamal. People with that level of wealth did not simply vanish without assistance. They were helped, hidden, or protected by networks that operated beyond normal legal boundaries. Kareem was convinced that if he continued following the smallest inconsistencies, he would eventually uncover the paths that Hamal used to escape. Over the next several weeks, he continued tracing financial channels, focusing not on the bold transactions, but on the subtle patterns easily mistaken for normal activity. He noticed several microtransfers routed through foreign accounts in a sequence that formed a recognizable pattern only after he charted them by hand. The payments were small, spaced perfectly apart, and directed to shell entities in regions known for hosting private travel hubs. It looked like an invisible breadcrumb trail, a system Hamal may have activated as part of an emergency escape protocol.
Each transfer pointed to a different country, but the timing suggested the money was not meant to linger. Instead, the funds bounced rapidly, acting as digital markers for safe routes. As Kareem followed each thread, he found himself staring at an unexpected clue: a movement log associated with an unregistered aircraft that had departed Dubai hours before the authorities discovered the empty penthouse. The flight path was masked, but fragments of its departure pattern indicated a pilot skilled in evasive maneuvers. The aircraft had flown toward a region known for isolated private islands owned by corporations with no traceable directors. It was not proof, but it was the closest indication that Hamal had likely used private channels to flee the city. Meanwhile, Marzun's interrogation revealed more about the internal war happening behind the scenes. He described months spent secretly mapping every flaw in the Sheikh's private systems. His goal had been to gather enough evidence to present to authorities anonymously. He had no intention of confronting Hamal directly, but the deeper he dug into the Sheikh's operations, the more dangerous the situation became. He discovered hidden programs, not just for surveillance, but for targeted elimination, automated routines that could be triggered under specific conditions. These systems were embedded into the penthouse infrastructure, ready to act without hesitation. Marzun admitted he planted traces deliberately to expose Hamal after realizing the extent of his paranoia. But he also confessed his greatest failure: the misdirection that brought Sahilma and Nimra into the equation. A data mismatch caused by one of the mirror channels he had infiltrated led to their names appearing where they should not have. He had been trying to flag two dangerous operatives working under Hamal's rival, not innocent researchers. When he realized what had happened, it was already too late. The penthouse had been activated, and Hamal had acted according to his darkest instincts. Even after hearing the full confession, Kareem sensed that Marzun was withholding something. There was a fear behind his words, a fear not of imprisonment, but of the possibility that Hamal was still watching, still capable of reaching him wherever he was taken. That fear was justified. While reviewing secure communications between different agencies, Kareem discovered a partially decoded message routed through a private network once linked to Hamal's offshore holdings. The message included a single line referencing a second phase, followed by coordinates that pointed to an encrypted safehouse outside Dubai's jurisdiction. The message was unsigned, but the timing matched the moment the penthouse breach occurred, suggesting Hamal had prepared contingencies long in advance. Kareem traveled to the location to investigate. The safehouse was deserted but meticulously organized, stocked with surveillance equipment and communication devices designed to erase themselves if tampered with. Someone had lived there recently, leaving behind faint impressions in the dust and scent traces of recently extinguished incense. It felt as though Hamal had been there, watching the aftermath of his escape unfold from afar. The discovery only deepened the mystery. With no active trail and no official support to continue, Kareem knew the case would fade from public memory. Yet he remained committed. He gathered every piece of evidence, every fragment of data, and stored it in an encrypted archive outside official channels. He believed that one day, Hamal would resurface. Men like him did not hide forever. They waited, rebuilt, and acted again when the world least expected it. And when that day came, Kareem intended to be ready.